My aim is to hardly ever say there is no next step. There is a wall beyond which we cannot go. I always believe there is a treatment that if one looks closely enough, one can become creative to actually find a very interesting and sometimes unique treatment strategy for that patient. And one thing that gives us power here is that we have the infrastructure to actually look at some of these unique strategy combinations. You know, it may take time with a given patient, but we walk around that condition for that given patient and then design and what I like to say is a hybrid treatment for these patients. It does take time, but I also say that we use time as a tool to get to that endpoint where that fragile brain network is stabilized. We lay out the strategy, sometimes literally putting it on the table in front of them. Whether it's a new pill or a given diet or food or a device that we can implant into them. We set it down and then we start talking about it and educating. What interest I have is also to educate with unique materials, animation-rich, something that people can grab onto that makes it very understandable to the patient, to family, caregivers, to healthcare providers. So at different levels we can actually design this, I like to think, animation-rich patient education material. So we are very involved with designing these materials on the web and on tablets. And for those people who don't have access to this technology, we actually can provide the technology to them too. I mean, we go as far as giving some of our patients augmented reality where they can put on a goggle set and walk around the environment so they better understand what strategies can exist for them. A specialist can always do things better than a generalist regarding a given specialty. However, with the 3 million people who have epilepsy in this country, roughly 2.5 million can be controlled with appropriate, readily available therapies. And many of those people do not require a specialist. And so I think there's certainly business out there for everybody. For the 500,000 people who really struggle with epilepsy, it, in my opinion, is mandatory that an epilepsy neurologist work with those individuals. They can be extraordinarily challenging, but what we find is that when we spend time with our patients in that category, we often come to a very good place for them. And if it's not today, it will be tomorrow. I truly believe that. I believe there are a fair number, but there is a shortage of specialists in every field. But we can actually work with many of these patients. The unfortunate data out there really do demonstrate that we do not access the majority of these 500,000 patients. In fact, about 100,000 of those patients actually can be surgery candidates at some level. And we actually access roughly 3,000 to 5,000 of those patients in the entire country. And so there is a problem, you know, and I think we are trying to better understand that. But we certainly have openings in our clinics and our hospitals to work with these patients. I think in part, this is only in part, education, not only directed toward the patient and their caregivers, but also to healthcare providers, to say, look, there is a better road one can go down as far as treating this. We've been struggling with this for decades. For example, a medication-resistant focal epilepsy that we feel we can actually take to surgery an individual with temporal lobe epilepsy, for example, who has failed at least 2 medicines, where we can go in and remove a scar that we can visualize on our imaging and do our pre-surgical evaluation to demonstrate this. We have a very high likelihood of curing those patients, actually curing them. However, it could take about 15 to 20 years for that given individual to make it to an epilepsy neurologist. And those are the data, and that's what's very difficult here to try to understand. And really what it comes down to is education, and also, you know, the ability to demonstrate, look, here's the place, here's what you can do. And surgery really isn't that scary. The risks are very low, and the safety of what we call resection surgery is very, very high. And I just don't think we get the word out well enough. I think it's communication and our misconceptions of how we treat a condition beyond a medicine. You know, I just think it's difficult to break some stereotypes of what some of these treatment strategies include. For example, surgery, brain surgery sounds like a scary option. And so we have to demonstrate that, look, there is a better way to do this. And as we're doing this, we are developing new technologies that actually make brain surgery minimally invasive, you know, to the point where we are not performing these standard surgeries anymore, where we're actually opening a big area of skull. We can, in some cases now, insert or even inject materials. For me, the future is between 2 to 10 years. So I think when we can look at trials beginning in 2 years, or deploy something that looks like science fiction now within 5 years, then I think we're in a great place. Within all of our lifetimes, I think we will be at a better place. And if one looked at the technology and strategies from 20 plus years ago, we were a long way off. I've been involved in epilepsy research since the 1980s, and I've watched this exponential growth of research that is now translating into the clinical setting. And now it's phenomenal what we can develop in the lab and then move forward into trials. One of the big hindrances, though, is expense. It still is very expensive. We're talking about tens of millions of dollars to get a medical trial to completion and then through the FDA. So I think that's where our bottleneck is with translation medicine now. The future really is very exciting because we will soon be able to guide some of these therapies non-invasively to their targets in the brain. So I think that's very exciting.